Welcome to the deep dive. We
Yeah.
got a ton of stuff on this case.
Yeah,
And it's weird how normal it all seems at first.
right.
Like just a typical mobile home fire in West Virginia,
Mm.
a family dealing with a horrible loss.
Mm-hmm.
But then you see her,
The mom.
Molly Delgado, yeah.
What about her?
And something is just off.
Off how?
No tears,
Oh, interesting.
no real signs of grief.
Like she's hiding something.
Exactly. And that's what sucks you into this whole story.
Totally gets you thinking.
That's why we're doing this deep dive today.
To figure out why, huh?
Exactly, to try and unpack all of this.
You hit the nail on the head.
That lack of grief, it's a big deal for investigators.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Huge red flag.
I bet.
It's one of the first things they noticed about Molly.
Really?
Yeah, and that's why they called in Steve Patrick.
Who's that?
He's a profiler from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit.
You mean like the BAU?
Yep, that's one.
Okay, gotta be honest, the whole profiler thing, it
Yeah.
sounds kind of Hollywood.
Like a TV show.
Totally, like Mindhunter or something.
I get it. But it's more than just a TV show.
So break it down for me.
Sure.
What does a criminal profiler actually do?
Basically, they're like pattern recognition experts.
Recognition.
They analyze crime scenes, the evidence,
Uh-huh.
even the suspect's behavior
Now that's for
to create a psychological portrait of the person.
like a profile.
Exactly. They look for things like motive, personality traits.
So in Molly's case,
Steve had to dig deep into her background,
oh wow.
her relationships, what she did before and after the fire.
All to try and understand why she was acting so strange.
You got it.
So, like, they're getting inside her head?
In a way, yeah.
But isn't that kind of subjective?
There's definitely some art to it.
I bet.
It's not like some magic power.
So it's not foolproof.
Not at all. It's just one tool.
Makes sense.
And you always use it with hard evidence.
Gotcha.
But when the motive's a mystery,
Yeah.
a profiler can really help
Like,
to narrow down who to focus on,
uh-huh.
come up with strategies for interviewing or even catching the suspect.
Okay, so here, the big question is,
Let me guess.
why would a mom kill her own kids?
Tough one, right?
It's just unimaginable.
I hear you, but it does happen.
Really?
Yeah, more than you'd think. The term is maternal filicide.
Maternal filicide.
That's what they call it when a parent kills a child.
That's heavy.
It's a dark reality.
I bet.
And it's not as rare as we'd like to believe.
How often does it happen?
Hundreds of times a year,
Hundreds.
just in the U.S. alone.
No way.
Yeah, it's a lot more common than people realize.
It feels like something nobody talks about.
It's definitely taboo, yeah.
But the more we understand it,
The better chance we have to stop it.
makes sense.
To understand Molly's case, we got to dig deeper, though.
Deeper than just, what happened.
Right. Maternal filicide isn't one size fits all.
So there are different types.
Exactly. Each with its own reasons and circumstances.
So you're saying there's a spectrum.
Yeah.
It's not always a mom just snapping.
Not always. And hurting her kid.
Some cases, it's severe mental illness,
Like what?
psychosis, delusion, stuff like that.
Wow.
Sometimes it's revenge on a partner.
Using the kid as a weapon.
Yeah. And then there are cases where
Yeah.
the mom thinks she's doing what's best for the child,
Oh, so messed up.
like a twisted kind of mercy killing.
So what about Molly?
In her case, investigators focused on the unwanted child motive.
Unwanted child, it sounds so simple.
Maybe, but the psychology behind it is complicated.
So how does that fit in with Molly?
The stuff you sent shows Molly felt trapped in her marriage,
Okay, I remember that.
having affairs, wanting a different life,
So the theory is,
that she saw her sons as getting in the way.
in the way of her happiness?
Right, burdens that kept her from that new life.
That's pretty dark.
It is.
Reminds me of that Susan Smith case.
The one who drowned her kids.
Yeah, because her lover didn't want any...
That one's hard to forget. These stories, they're disturbing,
I know what you mean.
Makes you think about the bad side of people.
The dark side of human nature.
But it's more than just a story, right? This is about real kids who died.
Absolutely.
That's a good point.
And while we can compare cases,
Yeah,
we have to remember each one's different.
for sure.
Susan Smith's case really shaped how people saw maternal filicide.
I can see that.
But how exactly? Did it create a bias?
Like, everyone assumed moms in similar situations are guilty.
Right. Or did it lead to more focus on how women show grief?
Maybe making it harder for them to express real sadness.
Exactly. Lots to consider there.
So we can't just assume every case fits a mold.
Nope. Each one's its own thing.
Speaking of evidence,
Yeah.
how did they actually build a case against Molly?
Besides her acting strange, I mean.
Yeah.
Well, they started by recreating the fire scene
Really?
very carefully, yeah.
I thought the fire was just in the kids' beds.
It was, and that's what made them suspicious.
How so?
They had to test if those fires were set on purpose.
Interesting.
So they went all out.
Like what?
They built a whole replica of the boys' bedroom,
They rebuilt the whole room.
full scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, at a research center in Maryland.
Wow, that's dedication.
They were thorough, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It was crucial, those results.
So what'd they find?
They lit one bed on fire
Uh-huh.
5 separate times.
Mm-hmm.
The flames never spread to the other bed.
So that means
The fires had to be set individually.
it couldn't have been an accident.
Exactly. They ruled out all the accidental causes.
So they suspected Molly.
Strongly.
But suspicion isn't enough for a conviction.
No, not at all.
How do you get someone to confess to something so awful?
Especially when they don't seem to care. That's where Steve Patrick's profiling skills came in.
So what did he do
He knew getting Molly to talk was key.
to understand her reasoning?
Exactly. That's how they'd get a conviction.
That makes sense.
Him and his team spent hours
I mean, what?
going over her old interviews, analyzing her body language,
Oh, wow.
coming up with a strategy for the interrogation.
Sounds intense.
They even did something pretty unique for the BAU.
What's that?
They role-played the whole interview,
Oh, seriously?
trying different approaches, guessing how she'd react.
I bet that was emotionally draining.
Can you imagine stepping into that role, even for practice?
Tough stuff. What did they learn from all that role-playing?
Well, at first they thought a woman interviewer.
Like, to appeal to her motherly instincts.
Exactly. But their crime analysts suggested something else.
What's that?
A male interviewer.
Interesting.
Maybe that would play to her desire for male attention
They thought it might lower her guard.
and make her more likely to open up.
Like connecting with her on a personal level.
Exactly, to build trust and get her talking.
That's smart.
They also decided to make the second interview voluntary.
So she could leave whenever.
Yeah, partly to avoid legal problems,
Wow.
but also to give her a sense of control.
Which was important for Molly.
She clearly wanted to be in charge.
Okay, anything else they did to prepare?
Yeah, they used a pretty risky tactic.
Oh!
They showed Molly a binder
A binder?
that looked full of evidence against her.
But it wasn't.
It was all blank paper.
You're kidding. The empty file bluff.
That's the one.
That's a bold move. What was the point of that? Just to scare her.
It was more about how she saw things.
How so?
They wanted her to think they had more on her than they did
To make her feel trapped.
and pressure her to confess.
Clever, but kind of messed up.
It definitely raises some ethical questions.
Yeah, like, is it okay to trick a suspect like that?
Could it be seen as coercion?
Especially given her maybe being vulnerable.
Exactly, and those points were debated during the trial.
Makes you think. So did it work?
Did she crack under pressure?
That's what we'll find out.
In part 2,
Did the empty file plus Steve's skills lead to a confession?
and if so, what did we learn about Molly?
We'll be back to unpack all that.
Before we left off, we were talking about Molly Delgado and that big interview.
With the fake evidence and everything.
Right, and the profiler, Steve Patrick, ready to question her.
It's crazy, you know?
I know what you mean.
Knowing what we know now, it's like
Like we're right there with them.
totally feeling all that tension in the room.
But before we get to Molly's confession,
Yeah,
I want to talk about the other people in this.
like her husband, Justin.
Exactly. His story is just heartbreaking.
Can you imagine finding out?
It's unimaginable.
But your wife, the mother of your kids,
I know.
might have killed them.
It's devastating.
All that grief, plus feeling betrayed.
It's almost too much to bear.
Did he ever suspect Molly was capable of this?
He said he had these little doubts, you know.
After the fire, seeing how she was acting.
Yeah, but he pushed those thoughts away.
Like most of us would, I guess.
Totally, wanting to believe his wife was innocent.
It shows how powerful denial can be.
Especially with something this horrible.
It reminds us that there's always more to the story.
Multiple sides to the same tragedy.
Absolutely. What about those guys Molly had affairs with?
Oh, right.
Did the investigators look into them?
Of course they had to.
Like maybe they were involved somehow.
As suspects or even accomplices, yeah.
Remember that theory?
About Molly wanting a new life with one of them.
And maybe seeing her sons as in the way.
Exactly.
So they had to question those guys.
To see if they put pressure on her.
To leave her husband.
Right.
Or if they knew anything about the fire.
Exactly, hoping to find a connection.
So did those interviews help?
Did they learn anything about Molly's reasons? Not really. Both guys denied everything.
They said they had nothing to do with it.
No involvement in the fire. No pressure on Molly.
And that their relationships were just casual.
They said they had no clue about her plans.
And Molly.
She backed them up, said they were innocent.
So basically, it was their word against hers.
Pretty much, yeah.
And without more evidence,
It would have been really hard to prove anything.
especially with Molly taking full responsibility,
That shifted the whole focus.
to understanding Molly's state of mind.
Right. And what led up to that night?
Okay, so back to that interview.
With the empty file and all.
Did it work? Did she react?
Hard to say what was going on inside her head.
Yeah.
But what we do know is
Yeah.
Steve Patrick, he used everything he had.
Like what?
Clever questions, watching her body language,
Uh-huh.
even a bit of empathy.
To break through her defenses.
It was more than just breaking her down.
It sounds like a more subtle approach.
Exactly. Steve understood that to get a real confession.
One that would hold up in court.
Yeah. It takes more than just force.
So what did he do?
He had to connect with Molly.
Make her feel like she was in control.
Like she was choosing to share her story.
And that's where the voluntary part comes in.
Right.
They made it clear she could leave at any time.
Exactly.
It made her feel like she had a choice.
It did. And her lawyers actually used that later
Really?
when they tried to get the confession thrown out.
They said it was coerced.
They argued the empty file thing was manipulation.
That it violated her rights.
It's a common tactic.
Challenging a confession, especially in big cases.
For sure. But here, the prosecution was strong.
How so?
They were super careful about her Miranda rights.
The right to stay silent, an attorney, all that.
Exactly. They reminded her constantly.
And they also pointed out,
But she agreed to be there.
and that she even left during a break.
Showing she wasn't being held against her will.
So she knew her rights and chose to talk.
Exactly. And that break ended up being important.
Yeah.
The fact that she came back to the room.
It solidified that it was all voluntary.
The judge agreed. The confession was allowed.
So it was a win for the prosecution.
It was. But did Molly explain anything?
Did she reveal her motives, finally?
Well, she admitted giving her sons medicine
To make them sleep.
and then using a lighter to set their beds on fire.
It's hard to hear those details.
Knowing what happened to those boys.
But did she say WHY?
What pushed her to do it? That's the big question hanging over the case.
One we'll keep exploring.
In the last part of our deep dive.
Okay, so Molly confessed to the how.
But she left a huge gap in the why.
We still don't really understand her motivation.
We'll get into all that.
When we come back to finish our deep dive.
Into the case of Molly Delgado.
So we've gone through a lot with this case.
Yeah, a ton of each.
The evidence, the interviews, the legal stuff.
It's a lot to process.
And now we're at the end of it all.
Wrapping things up.
But I still keep coming back to that same question.
The big WHY.
What made Molly do it?
What drove her to that point?
It's the question that hangs over everything, right?
In every case like this.
She admitted to the fire, but
Never really explained why.
like a puzzle missing a piece.
You see the edges, but not the whole picture.
So how do we even approach that missing piece?
We have to work with what we know.
The facts, her actions,
A bigger picture of these types of cases.
the unwanted child motive, right?
Yes. It still fits pretty well here.
Unhappy marriage, affairs, wanting a fresh start,
It's possible she saw her sons as holding her back.
stopping her from getting what she wanted.
That new life she craved.
It's a scary thought, but it does make sense.
It lines up with some of the evidence.
Did she ever say anything about resenting her kids?
Like she felt trapped by being a mom.
Yeah.
Not directly, no.
Wishy.
Her behavior during the whole thing speaks volumes.
That lack of emotion.
No tears, no real grief.
It's like she shut off those feelings,
Almost like she built a wall.
blocking out any love or connection.
A total emotional disconnect. It's a way to cope,
To deal with what she did.
To face that guilt head on would be too much.
So she shut it all out.
Push those feelings down to make it bearable.
Could it be something more than that, though?
Like what?
Maybe a deeper mental health issue.
We did talk about her mentioning depression.
In those 3 wishes she wrote.
Yeah, remember?
Absolutely, that could be a factor. Right?
Yeah. For sure. Depression or any undiagnosed mental illness
It could have really messed with her reality.
made it harder to deal with her problems.
So mental health is often part of these cases.
In a lot of them, yeah.
It doesn't excuse it, but it's important to consider.
A crucial piece of the puzzle.
So it's not about just calling her a monster.
Or saying it was pure evil.
There's more to it than that.
There are layers to this, multiple factors at play.
Her unhappiness, wanting a new life,
That detachment and maybe untreated mental health issues
all mixing together,
to create this warped reality.
where this horrible act made sense to her.
It's a reminder that these cases
As much as the media hypes them up,
are really about people
people who are flawed, who make mistakes.
capable of both love and terrible things.
And that's why these deep dives are important.
To look into the darkness, not to exploit it,
But to understand it,
to see what went wrong,
to recognize the warning signs.
and hopefully stop it from happening again.
You've given us so much to think about.
It's been a journey.
Criminal profiling, fire investigations.
And the harsh realities of these cases.
But as we wrap up this deep dive into Molly Delgado,
Yeah.
I'm left with this unsettling feeling.
A question that won't go away.
About those 3 wishes, remember?
Going home, back in time, getting rid of depression.
If those were her true desires,
Where do her children fit in?
were they just gone in her mind?
Erased from her thoughts.
Victims of her trying to change her own story?
It's what makes this case so haunting.
A question with no easy answer.
But it shows us that even with all the evidence,
Even a confession.
the human heart can be a mystery.
Hiding its darkest secrets till the very end.
Maybe that's the most disturbing part of it all.
We can analyze everything, try to understand why.
Seek justice through the courts
But some acts of cruelty
and the pain they cause.
might always be beyond our grasp. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive
It's been a journey.
into the darkest parts of the human mind.
A stark reminder that some mysteries
Just don't have simple answers.